Hello and welcome to Firstpost Africa, where we get you the top stories from the continent and from across the world. I'm Joshua Barnes, live from the Firstpost studios. First, let's take a look at the headlines. More than 1 million people have been evacuated in the Philippines as Super Typhoon Fanwong tears through the country. At least 4 people have died so far, as local governors urge the federal government for more food supplies and relief material. India says it is working closely with authorities in Mali to secure the release of 5 of its citizens kidnapped in the West African country. The kidnapping incident took place on November the 6th in a region long troubled by attacks from armed groups. A Paris court grants former French President Nicolas Sarkozy early release from jail, pending an appeal. This comes weeks after he started a 5-year sentence for conspiring to raise campaign funds from Libya. Voting is underway in Egypt's parliamentary elections, marking the start of a weeks-long process to elect representatives from 568 constituencies. And thousands of participants from around the world are gathering in Brazil's Belém for this year's UN Climate Conference. Delegates face the daunting task of keeping global climate cooperation from falling apart. We begin with the latest from Tanzania. More than 200 people have been charged with treason in the East African nation. The charges were made in connection with violent protests that rocked Tanzania following its recent presidential election. That election, won by President Samia Suluhu Hassan with 98% of the vote, has been rejected by the opposition as a sham. The opposition party CHADEMA has claimed at least 800 deaths in the wave of security crackdowns that followed protests. The death toll is feared to be in the thousands, as the true scale of the security crackdown continues to be obscured by internet restrictions which were imposed during and after these elections. In Dar es Salaam, hundreds of protesters arrested before and during the October 29th election were brought to court on November the 7th. Lawyers say they now face charges of conspiracy to commit treason and treason itself. Large groups of defendants were brought to the court in buses under a heavy police presence. President Hassan's government is yet to release any official figure on casualties and arrests that have followed her return to power. Lawyers and human rights groups say many of the detainees were subjected to torture and physical abuse while in custody. Let's listen in.
Events of November 2025. All of these ladies and gentlemen, numbering more than 250 in total, were arraigned in 3 separate cases before the resident magistrate court of Rasamat Kisutu, and they're all charged with 2 sets of offences. Number 1, the first set of offence is conspiracy to commit treason.
The treason charges come amid a wider crackdown on Tanzania's main opposition party, CHADEMA. Its Deputy Secretary General was arrested on Saturday, leaving just 3 of the party's 6 top leaders still free. Party chief Tundu Lissu has been detained since April, facing treason charges, while others have been accused of terrorism acts. The police say they are still searching for more party officials in connection with the violence, warning them to surrender immediately. But human rights watchdogs warn Tanzania is entering its most repressive phase in years, where political dissent is being recast as treason. The African Union declared last week that Tanzania's general elections failed to meet democratic standards. The continental body cited incidents of ballot stuffing, unchecked multiple voting, and the ejection of observers from polling stations. With the next court hearing set for November the 11th, the world will be watching to see whether justice or fear defines Tanzania's political future. And for more on this, we have with us Nerima Wako, a political analyst and executive director of SIA SA Palace, who is joining us live from Nairobi. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Narima, let's first look at this crackdown, of course. It follows an African Union report that has spoken about this political process. Is this the Hassan government pushing forward and defying all of the objections that are being made, not just within Africa, but also now globally?
First of all, when you're charging hundreds of individuals with treason, this is the greatest offense under Tanzanian law. It raises serious questions when it comes to proportionality and due process. When treason charges are used in the wake of an election, as you have mentioned, we've already heard from observers that have noted the broader environment in Tanzania ahead of the vote was already constrained. Opposition figures excluded, media, internet shutdowns, and reports of a hostile electoral environment. It's the risk that legitimate exercise of political rights, the right to protest, the right to assemble, the right to associate, are just not there. The fact that these charges follow an election that is questionable, where observers have actually said this, it means that they did not meet any democratic standards and undermines public confidence. It's already on a terrible footing, considering the severity.
Yes, and Narima, while you were speaking there, we were showing visuals from these protests. How do you think this government crackdown is going to influence potential future protests? Do you think it's going to stop them, or could this create more unrest?
So let's speak about some of the young people who've been arrested. First of all, it's going to go on their record. It's going to harm their economic stance. This is something that they're not even going to have access to employment. Talk about legal process, which is often dragged. So economic hardship, the social stereotyping around it. So it's supposed to instill a sense of fear. But what we've seen is support. There's someone who's been arrested and her own business is actually now thriving because people are showing solidarity toward her and going and shopping in her center and buying masks and things like that. So we're seeing solidarity from the public. And what the government is hoping is that it's going to instill fear, given the severity or the severity of treason and the potential for capital or life sentences. These are key safeguards that must apply prompt counsel. They need to have access to their charge sheets. There needs to be public hearings. So we will need to see whether this is going to be accessible to the public. So to answer your question, beyond the prosecutions, this is not going to work with this generation. It's something that's actually going to inspire in terms of people getting out more. They're going to use different forms of solidarity. I've talked about people supporting businesses. They're going to want to know who these people are. They're going to want to try and support them and make sure that they are not forgotten, that we're still standing with you, even though you're behind bars.
Yes, and Narima, as we bring an end to our discussion, I do want to now look forward. Hassan's government crackdown is continuing. Where does it go next, in your opinion? Do you think this crackdown is going to bring the country of Tanzania further away from democracy and further towards a regime that is anti-democratic? Or do you think this is a moment that might pass?
I do believe that as much as we have seen acts of violence and lawful acts, but we have to know that the matter of the response is the problem here. The framework of the charges is the challenge. The way they are being applied, the timing of it, relatively high when it comes from a contested election. I think that their reputation has already been stained. Remember, we're talking about hundreds of people. We're not still sure about the numbers. Not just dead, missing some of them. We're still seeing images coming out. So yes, I do think that, you start talking about protecting state, and that's what the government is using, should not override democratic principles on human rights. We are watching Tanzania overriding principles of human rights, and this is unfortunate. So we are going backwards, retrogressively, very quickly.
Narima Wako, thank you ever so much for joining us and providing that insight. Of course, a lot for us to continue monitoring, and we will continue to do that on Firstpost. Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Next, we head to Senegal, where the nation's Prime Minister has warned of sacrifices amid a faltering economy. Usman Sonko's comment comes after he slammed a proposed debt restructuring from the International Monetary Fund as a disgrace. But let's first understand the current economic situation in Senegal. In Senegal, the GDP for 2024 stood at around $32.3 billion, and the GDP per capita was $1,744. Now, this places Senegal 18th out of all African nations in terms of GDP, and a real growth of 6% is relatively strong for the continent. But debt is a major concern. Public debt is estimated at 132% of GDP at the end of last year, and this was up from around 100% at the end of 2023. The unemployment rate in the country stands at around 20%, with poverty affecting 36% of the population. Prime Minister Sonko was elected in 2024 on pledges to turn the West African nation's financial fortunes around, and the country's president has blamed the hidden debt crisis on predecessor Macky Sall, something echoed by Prime Minister Sonko.
The officials of the outgoing regime who are being prosecuted embezzled money for political reasons. 50% of the money they embezzled is used for political purposes, and the remaining 50% is transferred to foreign banks. We will put an end to these practices.
Now, in recent weeks, the government has implemented new taxes on tobacco, alcohol and gambling, while it has also applied taxes on widely used digital money transfers. The Senegalese government has also said it will cut back on spending through the suspension of vehicle purchases, official trips and workshops. But the dispute with the International Monetary Fund, also known as the IMF, is continuing to rumble on. The IMF had completed a mission to the country last week without agreeing to a new lending program. This comes after the IMF froze a $1.8 billion program last year after the disclosure of hidden debts, which are now believed to have ballooned to more than $11 billion. And the IMF proposal of debt restructuring, which is a process of changing terms of loans to make repayments more manageable, have been met with a fierce rebuke from Prime Minister Sonko.
We don't want a restructuring because it would be a disgrace for Senegal. It would imply that Senegal is a bad student who borrowed money with the intent to steal. We told them that this country is a country of dignity, a country of pride, that the Senegalese people will rise to the occasion, and that the Senegalese people will take responsibility.
But in order to get fund money, Sonko's administration will need to make steps to put debt on a sustainable path. Sonko has vowed to make efforts to get debt in Senegal under control, but is bracing the people for tough times ahead. For IMF relief and on plans to ease the burden of that debt, could the Prime Minister's pride be standing in the way? PM Usman Sonko seems confident that his administration can weather this economic storm. Now, for our next story, let's talk Angola. A historic visit by the Indian president is strengthening ties between the two countries.
मुझे लुआंडा आकर बहुत खुशी हो रही है। ये किसी भारतीय राष्ट्रपति का अंगोला का पहला राजकीय दौरा है। मैं महामहिम राष्ट्रपति लॉरेंसो का उनके सौहार्दपूर्ण आमंत्रण के लिए धन्यवाद करती हूँ।
India's President Draupadi Murmu received a ceremonial welcome and a guard of honour at the presidential palace in Luanda yesterday, as the two nations aim to expand cooperation and bilateral ties. This trip came off the heels of Angola's 50th anniversary of independence, a milestone that President Murmu acknowledged in a powerful message of solidarity.
भारत ने एंटी कॉलोनियल प्रयासों के तहत अंगोला के स्वतंत्रता संग्राम का समर्थन किया और स्वतंत्रता प्राप्ति के बाद अंगोला के पुनर्निर्माण और विकास में निकट सहयोग किया.
One of the notable aspects of the meeting, acknowledging Angola's role in India's energy security. Angola, being one of India's key oil suppliers, plays a significant part in ensuring the country's stability. But the partnership goes far beyond energy.
हमने नए क्षेत्रों में व्यापार और निवेश संबंधों को और विविध बनाने पर सहमति व्यक्त की. जिसमें टेक्नोलॉजी, कृषि, स्वास्थ्य, रक्षा, इंफ्रास्ट्रक्चर और पीपल टू पीपल टाइज शामिल है.
The two countries also exchanged several memorandum of understanding aimed at boosting cooperation in fisheries, agriculture and diplomatic offices, sectors seen as vital for the development of both the nations. Angola's recent decision to join the International Big Cat Alliance and the Global Biofuel Alliance also drew praise from President Murmu, a move aligning with India's ongoing efforts to support sustainable efforts worldwide. The visit by President Murmu marks India's renewed efforts in increasing its Africa outreach. This year, the two countries also celebrated the 40th anniversary of their diplomatic relations, with nearly $5 billion in bilateral trade between the two countries. Earlier in May, Angola's President Lourenço visited India, a trip that saw the signing of multiple MOUs in fields such as agriculture and cultural cooperation. With Angola's leadership in the African Union, the two countries also reaffirmed their strategic ties in multilateral forums like the India-African Forum Summit. India's increased engagement in Africa, including Angola, is part of a larger initiative to counter China's growing influence on the continent. China has made significant investments across Africa, particularly in infrastructure and energy projects, making it one of India's largest rivals in the region. In response, India has been expanding its partnerships through both trade and diplomacy. Namibia is the first African country to adopt India's UPI digital payment system, with Rwanda and other countries set to follow suit. Sectors like defence and space technology are also key in strengthening India's footprint in Africa. President Murmu's trip to Angola marks a historic chapter in India-Angola relations. Next, the president heads to Botswana for the second leg of her tour. The focus remains on fostering deeper engagement in Africa, which remains an essential region for India's global ambitions. And shifting focus to Kenya. In Nairobi this weekend, tails wagged and hearts melted. The Kenyan capital turned into a runway for dogs at Pawchella, an annual celebration of fur, friendship and flair. It was a sight to behold, from chihuahuas in sequined jackets to mastiffs in Maasai shukas. Every pup came dressed to impress. Some wore Mexican-style sombreros. Others had their owners match them in coordinated costumes. The event, fondly dubbed the Shaggy Dog Show, was organised by the Kenya Society for the Protection and Care of Animals, or the KSPCA. The organisation has been rescuing and sheltering animals for over a century. The day's theme, Adopt, Don't Shop, put the spotlight on rescue dogs, many of whom had once been victims of cruelty, car accidents or neglect. Organisers said the show isn't just about dressing up dogs, it's about celebrating Kenya's compassion for its dogs. Funds raised from Pawchella help the organisation care for rescued dogs and spread awareness about vaccination, especially as rabies and overpopulation remain serious concerns. Every furry participant was required to show a vaccination certificate, a reminder that love for pets also means keeping them healthy. And it wasn't just about looks. There were contests for the shaggiest dog, and even for the best owner-pet duo. One massive Caucasian shepherd took home the shaggiest title, while smaller pups, including a 1.5 kilo Chihuahua, stole hearts with their swagger. For trainer Mugo Karaba, events like these are more than fun. Let's listen in.
When you come to this kind of events, such dogs, they really get a lot of socialization in, and it makes them much more calm. Like now you've seen she's around many people, many kids, and she's not attacking, she's not doing anything, she's just being calm. So it's thanks to this kind of events. So that's why I really like this event.
The event also reflected something deeper, the changing culture of pet ownership in Kenya. Experts note that more Kenyan families are adopting pets as true companions instead of buying pups from the markets. From playful paws to proud owners, Nairobi's Pawchella underlines that compassion, especially towards animals with whom we share this planet, can be the best trend of all. That's it on the show for today. We will see you again tomorrow at the same time. Until then, thank you for watching.